Always, we are grateful to our patrons who are with us here on Zoom, and we welcome everyone else on YouTube. Today, Leah Davcheva will speak to us. Growing up, Leah realized she was unusual in knowing a language that was not widely spoken in Bulgaria. It turned out that this was Ladino. As a linguist, she was naturally interested in Ladino culture in Bulgaria. She started the storytelling project, recording the lives of Ladino Judaismo speakers. Leah's latest book is Kaleidoscope of Identities, Tales of Ladino by Sephardic Jews in Bulgaria. And by the way, she descends from the Catalan-origin Sephardic Rosales family. Leah. You can begin.
Yeah. Shall I begin? Okay.
Yes.
Welcome, everybody. I can't see everybody who is in this space. We share this space now. But anyway, so thank you. Thank you for your interest in the stories of the stories I've gathered of the Sephardic Jews in Bulgaria. So my best hope today is that our session of 90 minutes, I understand, yeah, is going to boost your curiosity about the Sephardic Jews who live in Bulgaria and the language they speak. Their languages called Ladino, Judesmo, Spaniolid, whatever you have there. And I also hope that my talk and your questions afterwards will stretch you to think differently than you would not have otherwise done. So these are my best hopes for today. We'll talk about the Sephardim in Bulgaria before and now, 100 years before, and maybe even more years before, back in the past. Then a couple of words about the genealogy of my family. And the core part of the talk will be about the Sephardic Jews in Bulgaria, how Ladino, how speaking Ladino has helped them live their lives, how they play their different identities speaking Ladino. So I started a project, a narrative research project, about a dozen years ago. And it all started with a conversation on the mountainside with a colleague who teaches at the University of Manchester. As we were walking up the mountain path, he said to me, "You never talk about your Sephardic origins. Why is that? Are you hiding these origins?" And this question really took me by surprise because I don't think I was hiding anything. I don't think I ever thought of my Sephardic origins. And within an hour or so, we thought that let's start a narrative research project. Let's gather stories from as many or as relevant Sephardic Jews in Bulgaria. Let's record the stories. And the idea was not to do much with the stories, but to record them for generations to come, to know what their fathers and grandfathers and grandmoms did with the language. Because smaller number of people spoke Ladino in Bulgaria. So the main idea was to record the stories, to see what these people 100 years ago until the present moment, what they did with the language. So I went back to Bulgaria. I approached Sephardic Jews in Bulgaria. I approached the Jewish community. I gathered 14 stories, recorded them, and then as we, with my colleague from Manchester, as we started analyzing the stories, they were all different, 14 different stories. But as we started analyzing the stories, we saw that something really, really interesting emerged. We saw that there was an underlying structure, as it were, of these people performing and speaking the language in 5 different zones. And then at the end of the project, I would say, I published a book, wrote a book, about which I called Kaleidoscope of Identities. And then the book was translated into Spanish. And my idea is to translate it into English so that more people can read about that. So this is what we're going to talk about. I'm not sure, when I was preparing for this session, I wasn't sure how much you would know about the Sephardim in Bulgaria. This is why I decided to put the year of the Sephardim arriving in the lands of the Ottoman Empire after the expulsion in 1492. We don't know how many people, how many Sephardim came to Bulgaria. We don't really know because there wasn't statistics then. Some researchers say that there were 90,000 people, some say there were 95,000 people, and some researchers say there were 120,000 people coming to the lands of the Ottoman Empire. And I should probably say that in the 15th century, when the Sephardim started pouring into the Ottoman Empire, there wasn't Bulgaria. Bulgaria was within the borders of the Ottoman Empire. So many people arrived. And of course, when writing the book and when I started the research, I read a lot of books about this because I didn't know much. And the themes which I detected in the literature I explored was that of the welcome offered, the welcome or not offered to the Sephardim, who welcomed them. The myth goes that the Turkish Sultan, the Ottoman Sultan, appreciated the riches of the Jews, which is questionable, if you ask me, the skills they brought with them, their connections due to the competence in different languages, their connections with people from different lands in Europe and beyond Europe. Also, in the lands of the Ottoman Empire, the Sephardic Jews were not the first Jews to arrive. They were the Romaniots, the Greek-speaking Jews who had come to those lands centuries before the new era. So one dominant theme is the welcome offered to the Sephardim. Also, another theme is, I don't know why numbers are so important, but maybe because over the centuries, over the years, because of the huge numbers of the Sephardim, all the Jews living in Bulgarian lands then were subsumed by the Sephardic Jews. And the Jews in Bulgaria that I knew, all of them spoke Ladino when I was a child. Now, they don't do that. Interesting is how the numbers progress or digress. So let's say that slightly less than 100,000 Jews arrived. In 1900, the numbers from 1900, 1946, the numbers keep increasing. And then, after the Second World War, in the period 1946, 1956, out of the 50,000 Jews who lived in Bulgaria, 45 emigrated to Israel. And when I was born in the early 50s, there were 5,000 Jews. And then, when the socialist regime was over in 1989, there was another big wave of emigration to Israel, to the Americas, and now we have 1,162 Jews, or people who identify themselves as Jews. And because I know most of them, I know that there would be intermarriages where the wife or the husband married to a Jew self-identify themselves as Jews. Another dominant theme in the literature, and I've chosen to put it here, is the loyalty of the Bulgarian Jews to the nation state, to the Bulgarian nation state, and also the contribution they made to the development of Bulgaria. And lastly, I've put a theme which has to do with how is this contribution acknowledged or not, and the theme of discrimination. I myself have suffered from discrimination, but this is a different story. Now, the heritage language of the Sephardic Jews is Ladino, Judesmo, I said at the beginning, Judeo-Spanish, and it wasn't the central theme of my research to go into the different names, why the language has different names. So I've accepted the name Ladino for convenience sake, if you wish, or also because this is the name of the language recognized and used, rather, by UNESCO. Ladino is a lingua franca. I mean, Ladino is spoken by all the Sephardic Jews all over the world. And for me, as a linguist, this is a very interesting and a very, how shall I say, beautiful phenomenon, that Ladino can become a lingua franca. And in the UNESCO listings, Ladino is listed as an endangered language. And researchers have been saying that Ladino has been dying for 100 years, and it is not yet dead, which is very encouraging. In my research, it turned out that Ladino offered intercultural opportunities to the people who speak it. And we will see later how this happened. Now, why me? Why was I decided to do this research? In my other life, I'm a coach and facilitator and trainer, intercultural trainer, and in intercultural training, languages play a huge part. Also, I'm the author of the book, Kaleidoscope of Identities. If you want to know more about me, you can ask me later. Both my parents are Jewish. It was only a year ago that I learned that my mom is of Ashkenazi origin. And I must tell you that my mom spoke Ladino a lot better than my dad. So this probably to older aunts and to people who in our circle of friends. What I brought the pictures you see are from my childhood. The one in the upper right corner is my mom, my grandma, and a cousin. And then the middle picture is quite interesting because I was already 6 when this picture was made. There was a place, a space in the town where I was born, where Jewish people gathered Saturdays and Sundays. And this picture is exactly in this space in winter, because you see, I've raised my hand because the heat coming from the stove was quite big. And I've raised my hand to protect myself from the heat. So it must have been winter. So all these people are my parents' friends who I knew in my childhood. So this is what I brought to the research, an insider to the world of the Bulgarian Sephardim, a rather an insider who wasn't aware of Jewishness very much. It all came natural to me as it comes to kids and to children. I wasn't thinking about it. Then something else I brought to the research territory was that, yeah, my familiarity with the Bulgarian Sephardim. And I also knew the Bulgarian context. Because I played with Bulgarian girls and boys, I studied in Bulgarian schools, I taught in a Bulgarian school, I studied at a Bulgarian university, and our friends now are most of them, 99% Bulgarian people. So I know the Bulgarian context. So one foot in the Jewish environment, one foot in the Bulgarian context. And also I have some experience with narrative methodology. My colleague from Manchester was an expert in narrative methodology, and he guided us into the research. And also my university education was, I was educated as a linguist. This is where my feeling for languages comes. And now, this is where I looked, because when I prepared for this session with you, my maiden name is Rosanis. And about 10 years ago, I can't show it. Oh, I can show it. This landed in my mailbox. It was a translation into English from French of the work of a historian who had the same name as my dad, Solomon Rosanes. And he studied the history of the Rosanes family. And it was first published in Bucharest in 1888. So the first part of the book was about where we came from. And in this book, which is, I have as a photocopy, 50 pages, Solomon Rosanes says that our family originates from the village of Rodas in Spain, which was founded something like the 2nd century of the new era. But then in a later publication, he corrected himself and he said that we come from the Castelvi de Rosanes, a small no, it's not very small actually, but probably it used to be smaller, which is at the foot of the Pyrenees. And I should say that my parents went twice to this village, and then my own family, my husband and my sons went to Castelvi de Rosanes, and it was a moving visit. I don't exactly know what moved me, but to be walking in a settlement which gave rise to my family moved me. one way or another. Then after 1492, the Rosales family moved to Amsterdam first, according to Solomon Rosales, then to Germany, and then to the Ottoman Empire. And my dad used to say, he's no longer among us, he used to say that the first records of the Rosales family in the town on the Danube, which is called Russe, was from 1672. Historians, Bulgarian historians say that there hadn't been any Jews in this little town until 1742. So I don't know who is right, who is not. I prefer to quote my dad one way or another. Then a lot of Rosanes people moved to Constantinople in the Ottoman Empire, and it is called the rabbinical period because some representatives, men of the family, became rabbis. And then Solomon Rosanes says that the family, members of the family, moved back to Germany, to Austria, and in Russia. So this is what I know of the history of my family for now. I decided to put this slide about what narrative research is, because now we are going to go into the core of my presentation. A narrative researcher takes an interest in the experiences of individual people and inviting them to tell their stories about. The question I asked my storytellers was, tell me about your lives, what you did with Ladino, with whom, where, and how. This question I asked of each and one of the storytellers. And although I tried not to say much during the storytelling sessions, there was no way that my experiences didn't, I don't want to use the word interfere, but didn't influence the story these people told me. I didn't say much during the storytelling sessions, but as people were talking to me, so many memories flooded my head. And it was really, really, really moving to listen and record the stories of these people. So the research project, within the research project, there was a new identity which I developed, the identity of a Sephardic Jews, which was dormant, which was never there. But during this project, I somehow grew up as a Sephardic Jew myself. These are my storytellers. And the pictures, I would like to acknowledge the contribution of the photographer. He is the son of this guy. So we'll go through the storytellers. Yvette Navi and her son, Elia Navi. Yvette was, she's no longer among us. She died when she was 102 of COVID. And she's the one who prompted me to write the book, Kaleidoscope of Identities. Every week she would phone me and she said, where's the book? Where's the book? Where's the book? Have you started writing the book? So I hold her dear in my memory. Her son is a financial, he worked in the Ministry of Finance in Bulgaria. So these two, Grady and Andrei, are artists. Andrei died 4 years ago. Grady will celebrate his 70th birthday in a week. Sami Frances was a journalist. He died about 10 years ago. And David Cohen is worked, I forgot where, but I forgot where. He died some years ago. Reni Ligi was the first to tell me her story. Because at the beginning of the research project, when I presented my idea to the Jewish community in Sofia, people weren't very friendly, to put it mildly. They even said to me, you don't speak Ladino, you're not qualified to do this project. And when I invited them to tell me their stories, she was the first one to volunteer. So I'm really, really grateful to her. She was a teacher of Russian, and she's a speaker of 7 languages. Solomon Bali and Aaron Bali are father and son. They're business guys. Then Sophie Denon, she died last year when she was 102. And this guy, I don't know whether he's living or not. He studied to be a rabbi. And he's the one I'm least closest to. This is why I don't know whether he's living or not yet. Then Itzko Finzi is an actor, a musician. And Claire Levy, she's an ethnomusicologist. And now we come to the core of my presentation. And please, David, when we go over time, please let me know, because I'm not following the time. So as I said at the beginning, at the beginning of my presentation, all the stories were different. But as I started analyzing them, what I saw was that people were telling about what Ladino meant to them. So I call this zone the zone of internal dialogue. And then everybody, without exception, spoke about what happened in their families, how they learned Ladino in the family, how they were discriminated against as kids because parents in their childhood spoke Ladino so that the kids wouldn't understand them. And then the third zone, which kind of emerged in front of my eyes, was the zone of the Sephardic community in Bulgaria, how they spoke Ladino within the local zone of the Sephardic community. And then most of these people have been to Turkey, they've been to Greece, they've been to Romania, they've been to Egypt, and they spoke Ladino to Sephardic Jews in those countries. And then the fifth zone is that of the zone of the international community of Spanish users. And this is such an interesting zone because some of the Sephardic, of the Ladino speakers in Bulgaria, when they traveled, they didn't care to speak Spanish. They spoke Ladino and they were understood. Others wanted to learn Spanish so that they could be better understood and they could understand better when they traveled to Spain, to Cuba, to Argentina. So these are the 5 zones. Really interesting. That's a beautiful outcome of the research. Now, most of what follows are quotes from the stories. So this is the first zone, the zone of the internal dialogue. Aaron, the business guy, he said, I felt exceptional when I realized that I knew a language which was not typically spoken in Bulgaria. And this has to do with the larger national and social context in Bulgaria as a socialist country and also as a new nation state. It was very important for Bulgarian governments, for the Socialist Party, Communist Party in Bulgaria, that there was one nation, one people, one language. So people spoke Turkish. We have a huge Turkish population. People spoke Roma. We have a huge Roma population. People spoke Ladino, but this wasn't okay. So this explains a little bit what Aaron said. Ronnie is his name. I felt exceptional when I realized that I knew a language which was not typically spoken in Bulgaria. And Andrei, the artist, he says, my sense of being an heir to this language is special. It enthuses and empowers me with a kind of primary and fundamental force. For him, as an artist, he felt he wanted to be unique, and I think this is inevitable for artists. And to find it in this language, it is a symbol, a token of our otherness, of my uniqueness. So, and then Grady says, again, an artist, Ladino gives me a sense of belonging to something larger. Every so often, it gives me the freedom of choice. I think this is great. For people to be able to choose which identity they play. I can choose the culture I want to belong to, even though it is not the language that I use now. It just pops up in certain situations. And this makes me realize that there's this language inside me lurking there. But it is not all easy and nice and beautiful, because Andrei said to me, I sometimes wonder about my Ladino accent or my intonation. Perhaps they bear some Jewish traces and give me away. Andrei is my age, was my age. We went to school together at some point. And it wasn't okay to be Jewish. It wasn't okay not to speak Bulgarian as a proper Bulgarian when I was growing up. So in this zone of internal dialogue, Ladino is a marker of identity for these people. It makes them different. They have a special voice. They do acknowledge their multilingual capacity and power of choice. But also, in what Andrei says, they are aware of the risk of being identified as Jewish. I can say a lot more here, but this is beyond the theme of our conversation today. And then in their stories, my storytellers said a lot about the family context. Yvette, she said, Judesmo is my mother tongue. At home, we spoke Judesmo. I spoke Judesmo with my aunts, grannies, with everybody. And she would often criticize me for calling the language Ladino. Don't call it Ladino. It's Judesmo. Ladino is something different. So, yeah. This is her. And her son said about her that she, when she wasn't being careful, Yvette, you could trace her Ladino accent when she was speaking Bulgarian. I couldn't, but this is what her son said. And then Reni, very interesting for me, she said, my grandma moved with us when she was 5. She could not speak Bulgarian, and she took it upon herself to teach me Ladino. She must have been a good teacher, because in less than 3 months, I was able to communicate with her in Ladino. And this made me think, by the way, because my husband's grandma, Grandma Victoria, who I knew, she spoke Bulgarian perfectly, and she spoke Ladino with my mother-in-law. So some grandmas couldn't speak Bulgarian. They only spoke Ladino. But my husband's grandma, she spoke Bulgarian. So it was different in different families. Who is that? Andrei? Yeah. My grandma always spoke to me in Ladino. When I was in my teens and my friends were around, she would still do it. And she very well knew that my friends were all Bulgarian, like my friends, and could not understand a single Ladino word. Invariably, my reaction was to respond to her in Bulgarian and thus demonstrate my disapproval, emphatically and strongly. This kind of response destroyed the intimacy between us. We would often argue, Andrei said. And in this zone of the family, people talk about how they were exposed to the language, different in different families. In my family, I wasn't exposed to the language at all because my grandma, my maternal grandma, died when I was 3 or 4. My paternal grandma, they emigrated to Israel. So there was nobody, no grandmas and grandpas to speak with. And my parents didn't teach me Ladino. There was an explanation on the part of my dad, but I don't believe this was the reason they didn't teach me Ladino. Anyway, in the families, there was complex navigation between languages, between ambiguities. I haven't chosen this excerpt to show you, but Gredio was saying that he listened to Ladino, he attempted to speak Ladino at home. Once he closed the door and ventured into the outside world, he spoke Bulgarian. So a clear line between where you speak Bulgarian, where you speak Ladino. And by the way, I don't think I have it here in my presentation. Elias Canetti, who is a Nobel Prize winner, was born in Russe, where I was born. He lived in the same street where I lived when we lived in this. And my dad used to say that he was third cousin to him. So a distant relative. And in his book, The Saved Language or something, I don't know the exact title in English. The family languages were German, Bulgarian, Roma, Romanian, and Ladino. So all these languages were spoken in Elias Canetti's family. So quite a multilingual background. Now we come to the zone of the local Sephardic community. And Eli, the son of Yvette, he said, in Plovdiv, the second biggest city in Bulgaria, my father used to go to the Jewish club every day. He played cards with his friends. All their jokes, curses, and playful bantering were done in Judesmo. And Andrei again, this is so interesting what he says, because I guess if I were to describe my father's response to Ladino, it would have been the same. When she was young, my paternal grandma Blanca regarded herself a modern young woman and tended to speak Bulgarian only. In those times, they apparently believed that speaking Ladino was something that only the lower classes did, or just old women. Competence in correctly spoken literary Bulgarian was very highly valued. And Grandma Blanca and my dad were the same generation. So I guess one of the reasons my dad didn't teach me, and my mom, Ladino, was that one of the reasons why. This is Ron, the business guy. He would say, a terrible pressure for integration was exerted, both from the inside and from the outside. I grew up in the Jewish neighborhood where we spoke Bulgarian with a distinctive accent. We did not like sticking out like this and did our best to get rid of the accent so that nobody could tell. And his son, who was the youngest, my youngest storyteller, he was 44 when I took his story. He would say, Ladino is like a live coal hidden among the ashes. Well, so in this zone of the local Sephardic community, nostalgia was the dominant emotion, the dominant sentiment. People, everybody was talking about how we are losing the language or how we've lost it. Also, based on that, based on the nostalgia, they spoke a lot about efforts to rescue the language. Yvette, for example, when she was 75 already, she developed a course in Ladino for Plovdiv. And there were 20 participants in the course, and she would teach people Ladino for 2 years. So all these, and there was a choir where they sang Ladino songs. So efforts to rescue the language. Let me proceed further. This is the diaspora zone of the wider Sephardic community. So Sonny Solomon, or Sonny, he was interviewing people for Spielberg's project. And he was very much aware of what was going on in the Balkan countries. So he said to me, we became Bulgarian Jews only 78 years ago. Before that, we used to be Balkan Jews. Should we find ourselves among Jews from other Balkan countries, there would hardly be anything to make us inherently different from each other, except for the language our passports have been written in. We do things in similar ways. Everywhere on the Balkans, I feel at home. And then something else. Ronnie, his dad, said, I do business with people from Istanbul in Turkey. Half of my communication goes in Turkish, the other half in Spanish. And here there is no nostalgia. Here there is no lamenting the loss of the language. Here what surfaces are the opportunities to communicate, to do business, to find people who speak the same language. And Sami, the journalist, he went to Jerusalem for some reason, I don't know what it was. I set out to see the Holocaust Museum. As it was closed, I wanted to find out about the working hours and came across a man from Egypt who spoke Spanish. When we finished talking, he said to me, if you walk a bit further, you'll find another guy who can speak Spanish. So no mention of an accent, no mention of oppression. Here the world opens thanks to Ladino, to the competence in Ladino. It's like the order, the Beethoven's Order of Joy. You see the music bursting when people start telling me what happened thanks to their ability to speak Ladino. It's the change in tone, the change in the mood. I could almost touch it. So in this zone, people construct themselves as competent users of Ladino. No nostalgia. They use Ladino as a lingua franca, and they move between the languages, between Bulgarian and Ladino. And this sense of common Sephardic origin is really, really gratifying. And thanks to Ladino, they become members of an international community. And they are no losers. They are no longer, they haven't lost the language. They are members of the Sephardic community who speak Ladino. So that's very encouraging. And then we come to the last zone, the zone of the global speakers of Spanish. Eli went to Barcelona at one point, and he said, I remember my first visit to Spain, quite an emotional experience. I felt completely comfortable in the Spanish-speaking context. And this is what my parents felt, by the way. And I was excited by listening to people and being able to understand. Away from home, I had this amazing sense of being in a linguistically familiar context. I said the last couple, so he did a presentation to the Barcelona Chamber of Commerce. And the last couple of sentences of my presentation was in Judesmo Español. It may have all sounded ridiculous and primitive, but it was received well. People applauded me. I felt at home and an insider. This is really moving, no? This is really, really moving. And then Reni, as a speaker of 7 languages, she was so linguistically aware. We accepted, this is the context, we accepted immigrants from Spain during the Franco regime. So she met Reyes, who was an immigrant from Spain. When we first met, I spoke to her in Ladino. I was amazed that Reyes could understand what I was saying. And importantly, I could understand her too. And then Reni, let me see. She was teaching Russian in the musical academy, but because she spoke so many languages and she spoke Spanish as well, she often hosted visitors like conductors and musicians from Spain and Spanish-speaking countries. So they were keen to hear the language, which she was talking of somebody from Chile. He was keen to hear the language which he had never heard anybody speak before. The time we spent together made me aware of the special attitude the Spanish and the Spanish-speaking people have for us, Sephardic Jews. They find it truly amazing that not only have we preserved Ladino for 5 centuries, but we also cherish the warmest sentiments for Spain itself. And this is another myth, but this is a different topic. These warmest sentiments for Spain, people didn't, coming to the Ottoman Empire, they didn't start with warm sentiments for Spain. Rather the opposite, I would say. And after 2, 3, 4 generations, when people have settled already and their lives have come close to normal, then they remembered where they came from. But this is a myth which people like to promote. And in this zone, we've come to the last slide, I believe. In this zone of the global Spanish-speaking world, people feel part of this world on the basis of mutually intelligible languages. And it's really interesting because some of my storytellers didn't care to learn Spanish, and they stayed with Ladino, relying on the fact that the languages are mutually intelligible. Some of them mixed Ladino and Spanish, and some of them learned Spanish. So that's really interesting how they approached the languages. And this is where my contact email. So did I stay within the time limit? I'm not sure. You didn't interrupt me, David. Ton, you did.
There is no time limit. Thank you very much. That was fascinating. Would you like to close your slide and then we can see everyone with full.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I was interested by what you were just saying at the end about Ellie and Reina feeling sort of culturally comfortable within Spain. Just coming from a Western Sephardic context, that's the community that was in Portugal and ended up around the Atlantic, so Portuguese speaking rather than Ladino speaking. I think we always tend to view, well, I generalize, but to generalize, I would suggest that we tend to see Spain as kind of enemy territory. It's sort of Inquisition and General Franco, rather than seeing it in the cultural way that you do. And perhaps there is more affection towards Portugal. But again, that's just a throwaway thought. I have a question about attitudes towards the language in Bulgaria. I mean, my impression is as the Yugoslav state was sort of expanding and being formed, and as the Greek state was expanding and being formed, they were much more hostile to other ethnicities and other languages than Bulgaria, and perhaps you know, I mean, famously, obviously, sort of under King Boris in the Second World War, the Jews within Bulgaria proper were protected, if not those in Macedonia. But would it be fair to say that the Sephardic culture in Bulgaria had a better time before communism than in its neighboring countries?
No, there are several factors. You know that during the Second World War, Bulgaria was an ally to Germany. Yeah.
Yes.
And there were quite a number. I wasn't born then. It's everything I'm saying is what I have learned from books, from history books, from my parents. So there were quite a number of Germans that weren't occupators because Bulgaria was an ally, but the Jewish question was very ripe here. And the Jewish people, 50,000 people, were very much against the Nazis. And they were part of the communist anti-Nazi movement. Many Jewish people, young people, my mother included, not my dad, my mother included, were part of underground groups fighting against the fascists, Bulgarian and German fascists, yeah? So this is one, and their contribution couldn't be so easily denied. after the war.
Mm.
Then Bulgaria is among the very few countries. It was administration policy, national policy, governmental policy, not to send the Jews to the concentration camps. So 50,000 Jews. After the Second World War, there were more Jewish people than before the war in Bulgaria. And I don't want to touch upon, so being an ally to Germany, as an acknowledgement of this, Germany gave the right to Bulgaria to occupy what is now northern Greece and northern Macedonia. And on the one hand, the population, the Jewish population in the old lands, old territories, didn't go to the concentration camps, but almost 12,000 people from northern Greece and Macedonia were escorted by the Bulgarian army to Auschwitz. You see? So this is a guilt which hasn't been acknowledged yet. So it is complicated, but it was difficult. It was difficult not to acknowledge the contribution of the Bulgarian Jews.
Yes.
And not to give them certain positions of power after Bulgaria, after the war. So this is the reason, but there was hidden anti-Semitism.
Okay.
And especially after the war in 1967, Israel became a country which we broke diplomatic relations with. So anti-Semitism surfaced afterwards.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tom, sorry.
Yes, you said that in Judeo-Espanol was a lingua franca spoken throughout the Sephardic world. I think that's true for the Eastern Sephardim, but the Western Sephardim didn't speak Ladino or Judeo-Espanol. They spoke Portuguese.
Yeah.
So it was not possible that the Spanish language evolved into something interlaced with Dutch words or English words, or it would have been Portuguese. But
Yeah.
that didn't go as far as Judeo-Espanol.
Yeah.
So that's, well, in Western Sephardic culture, Ladino did exist, but it was a written language, and it was reserved for holy texts, for the Bible,
Yes. Yeah.
etc.
Yeah. Yeah. That's. I wondered why. You know, one myth is that Ladino is the language of the Sephardic Jews, as you say, in Eastern Europe.
Mhm.
And in present-day Turkey. And I've often wondered, how can and they often call it Spanish.
Mhm.
How come that my dad's family came from Catalonia and they didn't speak Spanish, they spoke Catalan?
Mhm.
How come they all spoke Ladino? And then I was really interested in that. And what I realized afterwards, thanks to my readings, I have no other source apart from literature. And languages evolve, and there have been over five centuries between the expulsion and present day language. So the language, due to links and connections and travel and trade, the language evolved and became what we now call Ladino or Judeo-Espanol or Spaniolit or whatever. You see, so this language became a lingua franca.
Yeah.
So it isn't Spanish, although the vocabulary is 90% Spanish. There are Bulgarian words, there are Turkish words. The grammar evolved as well, so it's not Spanish. And this Ladino language became a lingua franca and is a lingua franca.
Yes. I think it has to do with the origin of the Sephardim in the East. They came from Spain directly after 1492. But some, or a large part of the Spanish Jews went to Portugal. And there they spoke Portuguese. And after a century, they still did speak Spanish, but their language that they spoke in was Portuguese. And that's what they took them in the Western Sephardic diaspora to Holland, to England, and to Curacao, to North America. So that it has to do with a different origin.
And you know, Ton, there is something else. The Ottoman Empire was quite tolerant to different ethnicities. What mattered there was religion. And also Muslims paid smaller taxes. Jews paid slightly bigger taxes. Christians paid the biggest taxes. You see? So what mattered to the Ottoman Empire was religion, was faith, rather than ethnicity. And the Jews were left or were allowed, I don't know what word to use here, to have their own communities, to have their own courts, their own synagogues. The Ottomans didn't mind, as long as people paid their taxes. And this is the reason why Bulgarian people preserved their language and their religion as well. They weren't assimilated. And it wasn't difficult to assimilate them. There weren't so many, 3 million, not so many in the huge Ottoman Empire. So the tolerance of Istanbul is one of the reasons why Jews were allowed to speak their language, to live their own lives as Sephardim.
Yes. How do you see the future of Ladino in Bulgaria? Will it be preserved? Will it disappear? Will it evolve?
As a jewel, it will be preserved as a jewel, as a beautiful jewel, as a brooch. And we'll talk about it in Bulgarian, we'll talk about it in English. We don't talk about it in Ladino.
Thank you. Questions, anyone?
Bernard has his hand up.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank you. It was a fascinating presentation. B, you managed to put in so much other cultural and historical information, which was very helpful. But I particularly wanted to thank you for sharing your methodology, how you went about it, how you approached the questions, the cultural and the organizational issues involved in your research, because I think that's really valuable to other people. And I have a very specific question, and it is about whether Ladino was maintained as a written language, and if so, what alphabet was it written in? Was it written in Latin, in Cyrillic, in Hebrew, in Solitreo?
Yeah, I'll tell you something personal. I'll begin with something personal. In my father's family, there were 4 of them. And it was only my dad who stayed back in Bulgaria when people emigrated to Israel. His two sisters and one brother, his mom and dad, left for Israel. And there was a lot of correspondence. And as a kid, I remember these letters coming. These envelopes don't exist anymore, I guess. They were light blue. There was Paravion written on them. And
letters.
yeah, and the letter, there wasn't a piece of paper, but the writing was on the sides, the inner sides of the envelope itself. Yeah. And they were written in Ladino with Bulgarian letters. So, and my dad kept them in a wooden box, and I remember this box. And we moved, when I was 16, we moved from Russe to Sofia, the whole family, and this box was lost.
Oh.
And I think it would have been invaluable in the history of my family.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the personal aspect. Then in the stories, I have no way to know. You see, I know it from, the knowledge comes from others. In the stories, Grady, one of the artists, he was talking about his two grandmas who were reading Ladino from books, beautiful books coming from Istanbul, from Thessaloniki, and from Skopje, for one reason or other. And Grady was saying he has this sense of beauty, that they were beautiful books, leather and with golden letters. So his grandmothers were reading these books in Ladino. And then Yvette, I think, and somebody else, they were telling me about the writing. The writing was in Roman letters, in the Latin alphabet. Why? Because in 1922-23, when the Turkish Republic emerged from the Ottoman Empire, Atatürk passed a law where the Turkish language and all languages spoken in the Ottoman Empire should be written in Latin letters. And this is when Ladino started to be written in Roman letters. I know about the Rashi alphabet, but I don't think any of my storytellers could read Rashi. So Bulgarian, Latin letters.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Judith, you have your hand up.
Hi, thanks again. Thanks for that really great, fascinating talk. So a lot of these questions about Ladino, everybody, there's a lot of Zoom groups and online groups devoted to Ladino, and you can actually find out a lot of these answers there. But basically, there was really no such thing as pre-expulsion Spanish. Like the word Spanish didn't exist. So Jews spoke whatever they spoke where they were living, right? In the area, there was no place called Catalunya, but in Aragon and around Barcelona where Catalan was spoken, they spoke obviously Catalan, but it didn't mean they didn't also speak Castilian or another language. In Castile, they spoke Castilian. You know, here they spoke this, they spoke Aragonese, they spoke Galician. And when they first were in the exile, of course, they kept speaking what they spoke, and bit by bit it coalesced. But there are words from Catalan, and there are words from Portuguese, and there are words from Old Castilian that aren't used in modern Castilian anymore. The trick is calling it Ladino, because as Ton was saying before, that wasn't the way the word Ladino was used. It was used for literal translations from Hebrew, from religious texts. So in the Haggadah, where you have Halayla Hazeh, you would have La Noche La Esta, as if you were saying the night, the this. But you would never speak that way. You would read that way, you would pray that way, you would sing that way, but you wouldn't have day-to-day conversation like that. You would say esta noche, you know, tonight. and not la noche, la esa. So there's all kinds of things happening there. I just wanted to say that. But the word Spanish is a modern term. You know, when after the Catholic kings unified Spain, and Castilian became the formal language of the newly unified Spain. So before that, people didn't say, you know, I speak Spanish. In fact, it's only recently in Spain that they even say that. They say, I speak Castilian, Castellano. And Judeo-Spanish is just a made-up term. It's just a coined term. Nobody ever said, you know, yo hablo Judeo-Español. That's, you know, a late 20th century construct. They said Judesmo, Judeo, Español, Español Nuestro, in Morocco, Jaquitia. And the National Authority for Ladino finally decided they were just going to put it all together and make it simple and just call it Ladino, and that's it. But there's been a huge confusion about how it's been used.
You know, Judith, the focus of my research was what Sephardic Jews in Bulgaria did with Ladino, because it was a backlash from the huge part of the research was about how Ladino was dying, who spoke it badly, how they spoke it badly, how was it insufficiently spoken, and how we were losing the language. What I wanted to do was to see how people use the language to live their lives, how it was beneficial for them. It was a backlash. It was the other side of the pendulum, to nostalgia, to mourning, to death.
You know, that's a beautiful, beautiful way of looking at it. I love it. I was mostly answering some people's questions that arose after. You know,
that's the reason why
gorgeous.
Why the names of the language were not. I'm sure it's such an interesting topic, but they wasn't the focus of my interest. The focus was how people benefited from using Ladino. So quite a limited view, I must admit, but this is how it was.
Thank you. Francis, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'm not going to speak directly about this. I'm very moved. I grew up in a family of Egyptian Jews who all bellowed in Arabic. They didn't speak Ladino, but they really talked very loudly all the time in Arabic and never taught me a word of it. But what they taught me about was how the differences happen in the world and how the languages in the world are different. And their expression of themselves in Arabic was wild and extraordinary. And what strikes me very much, because I've spent 20 years recording working class people, mostly speaking in dialect all over the UK. And I think and I listen to the way those dialects work, and what came for me out of your explanations was the power of the language to express the inner person and the ownership of that language to speak. And so when I went as a rather snotty younger woman up to Newcastle on Tyne and started recording the local working people, I was surprised, not anymore, at the power of the local dialect, the deep heart power of that dialect, and how the embodiment of their life stories came through the language, which was sneered at, of course, in British class terms, because it was an accent. But and I'm sure that I mean, I'm not sure, but I would ask whether that kind of deep embodiment of life, history, being, who and what and how I am, is probably what you said reminded me very much of that power. And of course, what it taught me to do was not to talk too much and to listen and listen and listen for as long as possible and record. But thank you very much for that. It was
Thank you, Francis. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Bruce. Is there a library or other collection of Ladino books in Bulgarian universities or cities?
A library of.
Yeah, so collection of
Yeah.
Ladino books and archives and writings and things.
I don't know. I don't know.
Mhm.
In the library of my family, in my dad's library, there wasn't a single book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were there newspapers in Bulgaria? I mean, some Jewish newspapers.
There is a Jewish newspaper. There were a couple before I was born.
Yes.
And when in my childhood, and now even, there is a Jewish newspaper, but it's written in Bulgarian. To some Bulgarian Jews, some of them were subscribed to a Turkish newspaper that was written both in Ladino and Turkish. And some of the people, like the journalist, Sami and Yvette, they were subscribed, they had a subscription, and they received the Turkish newspaper. And they shipped it in.
I was going to say, last time I was there last summer, they were putting out some small sort of pamphlets in Ladino, stories and just small pamphlets, new ones, in the Jewish community in Sofia when I was there in 2022. But I don't think there's an actual library. I think it's what you said. I think people have, remnants at home here and there if they do. And I could be wrong. I don't think there's an actual library.
Now, there was a Ladino club in Shalom, the Jewish organization. And this Ladino club, they published books in Bulgarian and in Ladino. And the Ladino poems and stories were written with Roman letters. Yeah. I have some of those books, yeah.
Ali is mentioning that the name of the newspaper is Salom, or it could be Shalom, which that newspaper is still in existence, I assume.
But it only has one page in Ladino. The newspaper is all in Turkish, and then it has one big page in Ladino. And in the past 15 years or so, it has a supplement in Ladino called Al Amanecer, which is all in Latin characters, but has a section always where it shows the alphabet in Rashi. And there's always a little section in Rashi so you can refer to it.
Yeah, years ago when I was in Israel, they used to have, I think, about half an hour in each different language that everybody spoke going on. Do we have any more questions? I don't think we do. Tom.
Yes. And today we have a surprise appearance by Judith Cohen, and she will sing us a song about books and about stories in Ladino or
Actually,
in Bulgarian.
I'll explain. First, I wanted to say that you mentioned my good friend Claire Levy. She's an ethnomusicologist like me. She's wonderful. She's one of the best ethnomusicologists. And I'm not saying this because she's Bulgarian Sephardic. She's just really good. So I was thinking of songs, and I'll sing you just a snatch of one song in Ladino and one song in Bulgarian. And I can't resist the Bulgarian one. I was not going to sing this, but Leah, as you were talking, I'm thinking stories, books. Where did I come across a song? So it's a song from an old song from Bulgaria, and it says, "Oh, pretty Neda is her name, Neda, pretty girl. Why were you gone so long last night? You went to the basement 3 times for wine and twice for raki. And then, young man, you came from Istanbul with a book of stories told by old grandmas and written by young brides." And I have no idea what kind of book of stories that could be. So I'll sing a little bit of this in Bulgarian and then a little bit of a wedding song in Ladino, because we're talking about Ladino. And this song, the one about the books, is in a standard 7, a Bulgarian 7. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2. And the waiting song, probably I'll do one in Bulgarian, Devitorka 9, 2, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I'll just do one and then the other. So, ne dolearna djevojko, što snoš ti tolko sedohte, što snoš ti tolko sedohte, 3 puti vino točihte, 2 puti ljuto rakija, Jabrile ludo tam lado, abrile ludo tam lado, snošti od sambol dojdohte, debela knjiga doneso, debela knjiga donesoh, debela knjiga donesoh, od stari babi kazana, od mladi bulki kisana. Estas casas tan hermosas, estas casas tan hermosas, para que bailen las mozas, para bodas las mis señoras, esta y otra. And so these are just fragments of a couple of songs. The first one was the Bulgarian one about the stories in the books, and the second one is just a wedding song saying these houses are ready for people to come and dance and have the wedding.
Thank you. So, thank you for the wonderful ending, and thank you, Leah, for a wonderful talk about Bulgarian Sephardic Jews. And thank you to our patrons who support all of this, and thank you to our viewers on YouTube. We will see you in 2 weeks' time with a totally different subject, the Portuguese nationality law with, remind me, with Isabel Conte and Teresa Santos. Hope to see you all in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. That was wonderful. Thank you,
Thank
Jude.